Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal interesting details on Tuesday, September 16, 2025. First, Cody sat in a quiet corner, staring at his hands, the weight of his own guilt pressing down on him. He had never imagined that things would spiral out of control like this. The love he felt for Molly had been real, but his actions had betrayed her trust, and now the distance between them felt insurmountable. The revelation that he had taken money from Christina to get closer to Ava in order to gather information had shattered the fragile bond he and Molly had shared. The anger in Molly's eyes, her disbelief at his actions, had been more painful than anything he had experienced before. He had tried to explain himself, but every word seemed to make things worse, driving her further away. As he sat in his sorrow, Christina found him. She had been watching him for days, sensing his inner turmoil, but it wasn't until now that she approached him. Her presence wasn't the usual source of tension it had been in the past. Now, there was a sense of understanding between them, a quiet empathy that came from shared experiences. Christina knew how it felt to be misunderstood and judged, and she could see the pain Cody was going through. She sat beside him, her voice soft and comforting. She reassured him that, despite the mess he had made, he still had a chance to make things right. Cody's eyes were filled with frustration, but also a faint glimmer of hope. He had been trying to find a way to make Molly understand, but his efforts had been futile. Molly's anger was justified, but the truth was, Cody had never meant to hurt her. The whole situation had spiraled out of his control. The money Christina had given him wasn't something he had asked for, but once it was on the table, it had felt impossible to turn down. He had wanted to help Christina, but he hadn't anticipated the emotional cost it would take on him. The guilt of using Molly as a pawn in a game that was never his to play was overwhelming. He didn't know how to undo the damage. Christina could sense his despair and placed a hand on his shoulder. She promised him that she would help him fix this, even though the situation seemed hopeless. She knew that he was a good person at heart, someone who had been manipulated by the very circumstances he had found himself in. Christina understood that Cody wasn't the villain in this story, it was a victim of his own choices, yes, but not someone who deserved to be judged as harshly as Molly had. She reassured him that they could work together to clear his name, to make Molly see the truth. She would help him show her that his love for her was real, and that his actions, however misguided, were not an indication of his feelings. As Cody listened to Christina's words, he felt a sense of relief, albeit a small one. Her support meant more to him than she could ever know. He had always struggled with accepting help, but in this moment, he understood that he needed it. He needed Christina's guidance and her help in mending the broken pieces of his relationship with Molly. But as much as he appreciated Christina's offer to help, he knew the road ahead would not be easy. Molly's trust in him had been shattered, and no amount of words could erase the hurt she felt. He could see the anger in her eyes, the disbelief that he could have done such a thing. But Christina was right, couldn't give up yet. Not when there was still a chance to fix things. Christina gently reminded Cody that this wasn't the end, though it felt like it. They still had time, and it wasn't too late to salvage what he had with Molly. Cody had to prove to her that his feelings for her were genuine, and that he wasn't just using her for his own personal gain. The truth, the whole truth, had to come out, and only then could Molly truly understand the situation. But it wasn't going to be easy. Cody would have to be patient, humble, and honest. Most importantly, he would have to show Molly that he was worthy of her trust once more. Christina's support gave Cody a renewed sense of purpose. He was still uncertain of how to approach Molly, still worried that she might never forgive him. But with Christina by his side, he felt a little less lost. He knew he had to face Molly, even if it meant enduring her anger. He couldn't undo the past, but he could fight for the future. Christina had helped him see that sometimes the best way to move forward was to confront the hurt head-on. There was no avoiding it. He had to make amends, no matter how difficult the path would be. As Christina stood up to leave, she looked back at Cody and offered a final piece of advice. She reminded him that forgiveness was a two-way street, and that while he needed to work on earning Molly's forgiveness, he also needed to forgive himself. She wished him strength for the difficult conversation ahead. Cody, for the first time in days, felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't alone in this anymore, and with Christina's help, maybe just maybe he could find a way back to the woman he loved. Second, Molly sat on the edge of the couch, her hands tightly gripping the fabric as she fought to control the tears that were threatening to spill. The argument with Cody had been explosive. She could still hear the harsh words they had exchanged, the anger and hurt in his voice, the shock in hers. The revelation that he had accepted money from Christina to get close to Eva had shattered her. It wasn't just the betrayal of their relationship that hurt, it was the idea that Cody, someone she had trusted and loved deeply, had been willing to compromise their bond for something as shallow as money. Molly had always believed in his integrity, but now, in the wake of his actions, she was questioning everything. Her heart ached as she thought about the person she had once known, wondering how he could have done something so selfish, so dishonest. Elizabeth walked into the room, sensing Molly's distress. She had seen the strain in her friend's eyes all day, and after hearing the fallout of the fight with Cody, she knew Molly needed someone to talk to. Molly's face was a picture of sadness and frustration, and Elizabeth quietly sat beside her, giving her the space to speak without interruption. For a moment, the two women sat in silence, the weight of the unspoken words hanging between them. Molly's eyes were cast downward, avoiding eye contact as she gathered her thoughts. Finally, with a deep sigh, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She recounted everything's argument with Cody, his defense of his actions, and the overwhelming feeling of betrayal that had consumed her. As Molly spoke, Elizabeth listened intently, her expression soft and understanding. She knew that Molly had been in love with Cody for a long time, and this betrayal hit hard. Molly's words were filled with confusion and hurt, the pain of realizing that someone she had cared for deeply had made such a grave mistake. Elizabeth could see the emotional toll it was taking on her friend, and she wished she could take away the pain. But all she could do for now was listen and offer her support. Elizabeth's heart went out to Molly, knowing that this was one of the hardest things her friend had ever gone through. She placed a comforting hand on Molly's, her voice gentle as she spoke. She didn't need to offer any grand solutions or advice sometimes, just being there was enough. Molly's voice cracked as she continued, the raw emotion in her words reflecting the depth of her hurt. "I don't even recognize him anymore," she said, her voice trembling with sadness. "How could he do that to me?" To us, her eyes were wide with disbelief, as if she was still processing the reality of what had happened. "I thought we were building something real, something lasting. But now, I feel like everything we had was a lie." The weight of her disappointment was clear in her tone, and Elizabeth felt her pain deeply. She couldn't pretend to understand exactly how Molly was feeling, but she knew that this betrayal was one that cut to the core. Elizabeth squeezed Molly's hand, offering reassurance without needing to say much. She knew that, in moments like these, words could be inadequate. But she also knew that Molly needed to hear that she wasn't alone. "You're not alone in this, Molly," Elizabeth said softly, her voice steady. "You have every right to be hurt, and it's okay to feel angry and confused. What Cody did was wrong, and it's going to take time to heal from this." Elizabeth paused for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "But remember that this doesn't define who you are, and it doesn't take away your worth. You are strong, and you will get through this." Molly nodded slowly, her eyes still clouded with pain. Elizabeth's words were comforting, but the reality of what had happened was still too fresh, too raw. She had trusted Cody, believed in him, and now that trust had been shattered. It wasn't just the act itself that hurt, it was the realization that she had been deceived, manipulated in a way that she never thought possible. Her heart had been open to him, and now she was left with a sense of emptiness and betrayal. "I don't know if I can ever trust him again," Molly admitted, her voice barely audible. "How can I? How do I move forward after this?" Elizabeth took a deep breath, her own heart heavy with sympathy for her friend. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, and that the decision Molly faced was a difficult one. "Trust is hard to rebuild, Molly," Elizabeth said honestly, "but it's not impossible. You have every right to take the time you need to figure out what you want and what's best for you. Don't rush yourself into forgiveness if you're not ready. Take care of yourself first." Elizabeth's voice was filled with conviction, and Molly could sense that her friend truly understood the magnitude of the situation. Elizabeth wasn't offering empty platitudes, she was offering her genuine support, and that was what Molly needed most right now. Molly let out a deep sigh, feeling the weight of Elizabeth's words settle into her heart. It was clear that healing wasn't going to happen overnight. She would have to take time to process everything, to decide if she could ever forgive Cody for what he had done. But in that moment, with Elizabeth by her side, she felt a little less alone. She wasn't sure what the future held, but at least for now, she knew that she had a friend who cared, and who would be there for her through it all. With Elizabeth's quiet strength and comforting presence, Molly felt a small sense of relief, as though a weight had been lifted, even if just for a moment. She wasn't sure where her relationship with Cody would go, but for the first time in days, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to move forward. Third, Emma and Joe had been steadily making progress in their personal and professional lives. Emma had been working tirelessly to gain Professor Dalton's trust, and the past few weeks had shown promise. Her strategy was slowly paying off, as she had managed to build a rapport with him, getting closer to the answers she desperately sought. The prospect of uncovering the truth about the deep web of danger surrounding Port Charles seemed more tangible with each passing day. Meanwhile, her relationship with Joe had also blossomed. The two of them shared a deep connection, not only in their shared commitment to the investigation but also in their personal lives. They had recently adopted a dog, Outback, a loyal and spirited companion who quickly became an integral part of their lives. The trio had begun to feel like a real family, bonded not just by their mission but also by the love and joy Outback brought into their home. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Emma and Joe were becoming more united in their mission, and Outback was a constant reminder of the warmth and comfort they had found in each other. It felt like the perfect balance, progress on their investigation, growth in their relationship, and the simple joy of being together with their dog. The little things, like playing fetch with Outback or taking walks around the neighborhood, gave them moments of respite from the tension of their work. Despite the underlying danger and uncertainty of their situation, these moments of peace were comfort, a reminder of what they were fighting for. But that comfort was suddenly shattered one morning when they woke up to find Outback missing. The dog, who had never strayed far from their side, was nowhere to be found. Emma's heart sank as she searched the house, calling out for him in a desperate, trembling voice. Joe joined her, his face creased with worry as he scoured the yard and the nearby streets. They had always kept a close eye on Outback, and the thought of him wandering off alone in a neighborhood they thought was safe felt unbearable. Panic set in as they realized that despite their best efforts, the dog was gone. The search for Outback consumed them for the next several days. Emma and Joe scoured every corner of the neighborhood, talking to neighbors, posting flyers, and visiting local animal shelters. They knocked on doors, asking anyone who might have seen the dog, but all their efforts were in vain. Each passing hour without any leads felt like a crushing weight, and uncertainty gnawed at them both. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. Emma couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't right. Outback wouldn't have simply run off. He was too loyal, too attached to them. She couldn't help but wonder if something or someone had taken him. Joe tried to stay optimistic, but it was becoming harder with every fruitless hour that passed. He kept telling Emma that they had to hold on to hope, that Outback might just be lost and would find his way back. But deep down, both of them knew that the situation didn't feel like an accident. Something had happened to their dog. Their search was now a desperate hunt, not just for Outback, but for any clue that might lead them to him. Emma's mind was racing with possibilities had someone stolen him. Or worse, had he been caught in something dangerous they hadn't anticipated. It felt as though their world was unraveling, piece by piece. As the days stretched on without any sign of Outback, the strain began to take its toll on both Emma and Joe. The emotional burden of not knowing where their beloved dog was, or if he was even safe, was overwhelming. They found themselves growing more and more distant from their mission. Emma couldn't focus on the investigation. Her mind kept drifting back to Outback, and the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. Joe, too, found it hard to concentrate, his thoughts constantly drifting to the empty space in their home where Outback used to be. It was as if a part of their lives had been ripped away, and they were struggling to fill the void. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of searching, Emma and Joe sat down together, exhausted both physically and emotionally. They had no answers, no new leads, and no closure. The weight of the situation was heavy, and for the first time in a long time, both of them felt defeated. Their eyes met, and without a word, they both knew what the other was feeling. The loss of Outback had become more than just the disappearance of a pet. He was a symbol of all the things they couldn't control in their lives, all the knowns that seemed to keep piling up. The investigation, their relationship, and now this everything seemed uncertain. Emma wiped a tear from her cheek, her voice barely a whisper as she spoke. "I just don't understand, Joe. How could this happen?" Joe pulled her into a tight hug, his arms offering comfort even though he, too, was consumed by the same questions. "I don't know," he replied softly, "but we'll keep looking. We won't give up on him." His words were meant to reassure her, but the truth was, both of them were afraid. Afraid that they might never see Outback again, and afraid of the darker possibilities that loomed just out of sight. Fourth, Lucas had always been a compassionate person, someone who was quick to lend a helping hand to anyone in need. Over the past few weeks, Eva had been coming to him more frequently, asking for sleeping pills to help her cope with her chronic insomnia. At first, Lucas had seen it as just another case of a patient struggling to find rest, and he'd done his best to provide her with the medication she needed. He never questioned her intentions or asked too many personal questions. After all, Eva had been through a lot, especially with her complicated past and the trauma that she had suffered. Lucas had always admired her strength, her ability to keep going despite the challenges she faced, and he felt a sense of duty to help her in any way he could. But lately, things had started to feel different. Eva's visits had become more frequent, and there was something in the way she spoke to him, something more personal in her tone. She would linger longer than necessary, and sometimes, Lucas noticed the subtle way she would look at him, as if trying to convey something unspoken. It was during one of these moments that Lucas began to realize that his feelings toward Eva had started to shift. He had always thought of her as a patient someone who needed his help and care, but now, there was a growing sense of warmth when he saw her. He found himself thinking about her when she wasn't around, wondering if she was okay, if she had gotten any rest. Eva had become more than just another person to help. She had become someone who stirred emotions he hadn't expected. Eva, too, had begun to feel a different kind of connection to Lucas. At first, her visits had been purely about getting what she needed, a solution to her insomnia that would allow her to get some peace. But as time passed, she found herself looking forward to her time with him. There was something comforting about the way Lucas listened to her, the way he made her feel seen and understood in a way few others had. She had always been so guarded, so focused on survival, but with Lucas, she felt a rare sense of vulnerability that was both unsettling and comforting. She appreciated his kindness, his quiet strength, and the way he made her feel safe, even when the rest of the world felt chaotic. It wasn't long before Eva realized that her feelings for Lucas had deepened into something more than just gratitude or friendship. She had come to admire him in a way that went beyond the professional boundaries they had once maintained. There was a tenderness in the way he cared for her, a genuine interest in her well-being that made her feel valued. Slowly, she began to open up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone else. Her guard, which had been so firmly in place for so long, started to come down around him. She found herself drawn to him, not just as a doctor or a helpful figure, but as someone who truly saw her for who she was. Lucas, too, had noticed the shift in his own feelings. What had started as a professional relationship was now evolving into something more complicated. He found himself thinking about Eva at night, wondering if she was able to sleep, wondering if she was okay. He knew that his feelings were beginning to blur the lines between doctor and patient, and that worried him. He had always prided himself on maintaining a professional distance, but with Eva, that distance was becoming harder to maintain. She was kind, intelligent, and undeniably beautiful, and there was an undeniable pull between them that he couldn't ignore. But Lucas also knew that things couldn't stay this way forever. He had a responsibility to his patients, and to his own well-being, to not let personal feelings interfere with his professional duties. However, Lucas remained unaware of the full extent of the situation. What he didn't know was that the sleeping pills Eva had been requesting weren't just for her. In fact, Eva had been using the medication for a far more dangerous purpose. She had been secretly giving the pills to Rick, her estranged brother, who had been struggling with his own issues. Rick had been in and out of various treatments and therapies, but his condition had worsened, and Eva had resorted to using the sleeping pills as a means of controlling his behavior. She had hoped that the sedatives would keep him calm, prevent him from spiraling into fits of rage or self-destructs. But what she didn't realize was that the combination of the pills and Rick's other medications was starting to have serious, potentially life-threatening consequences. If Lucas were to find out that the sleeping pills he had been prescribing were being used in this way, it could have disastrous consequences. Not only would it damage his trust in Ava, but it could also put her in legal jeopardy. The implications of what she was doing could lead to criminal charges, and Lucas, as a medical professional, could be held responsible for unknowingly aiding in the administration of dangerous drugs. The thought of losing Ava's trust, of finding out that she had been hiding such a dark secret from him, filled him with dread. He had always believed in her sincerity and the connection they had built, but this new revelation would turn everything upside down. As the days went on, Lucas's feelings for Ava continued to grow, but so did his unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right, that there was more to Ava's story than she was letting on. His instinct as a doctor told him that he needed to be cautious, to dig deeper into what was really happening with her and Rick. The last thing he wanted was for his feelings to cloud his judgment, but he couldn't ignore the nagging suspicion that there was something Ava wasn't telling him. If he ever discovered the truth about how the sleeping pills were being used, it would not only destroy his relationship with her but could have far-reaching consequences for both their lives. And the more time he spent with her, the more he realized that the line between helping her and enabling her was becoming dangerously thin. Finally, Nina's anger flared up uncontrollably as she learned of Willow's continued relationship with Michael. It was bad enough that she had already felt betrayed by her daughter's disloyalty towards her, but now, the realization that Willow had not only kept her ties to Michael intact but had also conspired with Drew to manipulate him was enough to send her into a spiral of rage. The news seemed to gnaw at her heart, pushing her emotions to the brink. She had always hoped that Willow would come around, that she would see reason and break free from the toxic hold that Michael had on her. But now, it seemed that Willow was not just holding on to her relationship with Michael. She was actively working with Drew, a man Nina despised with every fiber of her being, to undermine Michael and win custody of their child. It was a betrayal that Nina simply couldn't stomach, a betrayal that cut deeper than any of the wounds Michael had ever inflicted on her. Willow, in Nina's eyes, had gone from being a naive young woman trying to find her way to someone who was now entirely driven by a desire for power and control. The fact that she was willing to stoop so low, to conspire with someone like Drew, made Nina's blood boil. Nina had always believed in the goodness of her daughter, but this new alliance with Drew seemed like the ultimate sign of her downfall. Drew, with his manipulative and self-serving ways, was the last person Nina could ever trust, and the fact that Willow was aligning herself with him was something Nina couldn't forgive. Drew had always been a thorn in Nina's side, someone whose every move seemed calculated and cold, and the thought that Willow was under his influence filled her with disgust. Nina's hatred for Drew wasn't something new, it had been building for years. His role in the disruption of her life, in separating her from the people she loved, had always made her distrust him. Now, with the news that Willow was helping Drew manipulate Michael in their custody battle, it seemed that Drew's reach was extending even further, and Nina felt the walls closing in. She couldn't stand the idea of her daughter being so easily manipulated, so completely under Drew's control. To Nina, it was like watching Willow lose herself, becoming nothing more than a puppet in Drew's cruel game. It sickened her to think that Willow, whom she had once hoped would stand up for what was right, was now doing Drew's bidding, hurting the very people who had cared for her. The news was a blow to Nina's already fragile sense of control. The one thing that she had held onto in the chaos of her life was her belief that she could protect her daughter, that she could guide Willow away from the dangerous influences that seemed to surround her. But now, with Willow aligning herself with Drew, Nina felt as though she was losing her grip on everything. This wasn't just about a custody battle, it was about the soul of her daughter. She couldn't bear to think of Willow becoming someone she didn't recognize, someone who was willing to sacrifice everything for a victory that, in Nina's mind, was tainted. Drew's manipulation, his dark influence over Willow, was a violation of everything Nina had hoped for her daughter. It was a bridge too far, and Nina felt an overwhelming urge to do whatever it took to stop it. As Nina paced back and forth, the fury inside her continued to build. She knew that if she didn't act quickly, she would lose Willow for good. She had to stop Drew, and she had to stop Willow from sinking deeper into his web of lies and manipulation. But how? How could she break Willow free from Drew's grasp without pushing her further away? Nina knew that any attempt to directly confront Willow about her involvement with Drew would likely be met with resistance. Willow was already so far gone, and Nina feared that the more she pushed, the more Willow would retreat into Drew's world. She had to be strategic, patient, and above all, persuasive. She needed to find a way to make Willow see the truth, to open her eyes to the destructive path she was on before it was too late. Nina's mind raced as she considered her options. She knew she couldn't trust Drew's motivations were always self-serving, always rooted in a need for control and power. He would stop at nothing to get what he wanted, and right now, what he wanted was to take Willow and Michael's child away from him. Nina couldn't let that happen, but she also knew that if she confronted Drew directly, it would only escalate the situation. He would fight back, and in doing so, he would drag Willow further into his dangerous plans. No, Nina realized, the key to stopping this was to work with Willow, not against her. She had to make Willow see that Drew wasn't the ally he appeared to be. But how could she do that without completely alienating her daughter? The answer, Nina realized, was simple but difficult. She would have to play the long game. Nina was no stranger to manipulation herself, and while it pained her to think of using her own daughter to get what she wanted, she realized it might be the only way to get through to Willow. She would need to make Willow see that Drew's motives were anything but pure, that his promises were empty and dangerous. Nina would have to outmaneuver him, use his own tactics against him. But she also knew that it wasn't just about winning the custody battle, it was about saving Willow from herself, from the destructive path she had chosen. Nina couldn't lose her daughter, not like this. Nina's resolve hardened as she made a vow to herself. She would stop Willow from making this mistake, no matter the cost. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but Nina was willing to do whatever it took to protect her daughter. If that meant playing dirty, so be it. Drew had already shown his true colors, and now it was time for Nina to do the same. She would fight for Willow, for their family, and she would not let Drew or anyone else tear them apart.